Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Get Hired workshop. My name is Kayla Lopez. I am the Senior Director of Military Partnerships here at Victory and GI Jobs. Really excited today to bring you an awesome group of panelists who will be joining us and provide you guys with a ton of information. So make sure that you stay engaged, throw some questions in the chat, have a conversation with us, and let's get down to the information that we want to know. Right? We've got an awesome group here today that are so full of knowledge and industry expertise. It's great. So if you haven't gotten registered yet, just remember we have our Get Hired workshop that is coming up here in 2 weeks. So that's just 14 days away, April 27th from 12 to 4. Again, if you haven't gotten registered, go ahead and visit gijobs.com/fair. And let's jump into today's Get Hired workshop. So we've got 3 awesome panelists. We'll give you brief kind of intro of who they are, where they're from, and let them tell us a little bit about themselves. So we've got Sean Wilkins, who is a military program or military recruit. I am so sorry, guys. The military recruiting manager for Penske, Sultan Camp, who is the director of employment centers for Hampton Roads Workforce Council. And then Matt Disher is a program leader and military veterans chairman for Cushman Wakefield's ERG. So before we get started, Sean, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Sean Wilkins, again, military recruiting program manager, whatever you want to call me, for Penske. So Penske is a large transportation and logistics company nationwide, worldwide as well. My quick background, I served 8 years in the Army as an officer, mostly doing S1 stuff, so HR related things. Kind of typical story. Went to Iraq, went to Afghanistan, decided to transition out. I've been with Penske for about 5 years now, helping to grow our program. So a lot of great opportunities. We have about 3,000 veterans across our organization, and really excited to talk more to everybody about Penske and just general military transition stuff and everything that we have today. So thank you. Excited for being here.
Thanks, Sean. Sultan?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Sultan Camp, 20-year Navy veteran, transitioned out. Geez, time flies when you're having fun. Roughly about 14 years ago, landed my first dream job when I got out teaching the transition classes, then did third-party military recruiting for about 3 years. Joined a small company of about 24,000 employees back in the fall of 16 as their veteran and military spouse hiring lead. And now I get the privilege of being the director at the Hampton Roads Workforce Council for both of our veterans employment centers. Our goal is pretty simple: to connect our military community at large with our 5 major industries in the area, which include maritime, advanced manufacturing, cyber and IT, healthcare, biotechnology, and logistics and warehousing. So it's a real honor and a privilege to be here today.
Thanks, Sultan. Matt?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Matt Disher. I lead military and veterans programs here at Cushman Wakefield. One of the first questions I get is, who the heck is Cushman Wakefield? We're one of the largest global commercial real estate services companies. We manage about 5 billion square feet of property across the globe. We have about 50,000 global employees, about 32,000 here in the United States. We hire people, everything from engineers to property managers. We manage some of the most iconic properties where you live, work, and shop, and those are downtown to the suburbs. A little bit about me: Marine Corps veteran, spent 4 years in the Marines. I was a combat engineer, went in to learn how to do construction trades, and I figured I was going to use that in my career on the way out. And I never built anything in the Marines, and I only blew things up. And so when I came out, I found myself trying to figure out how I translate that into what corporate America would like out of me. And it's one of the motivations I have for doing what I do these days. So I've been doing this type of work in multiple different companies for about 12 years now of my career. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation today. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Really excited to go through this, right? So we get asked a ton of questions every time we do this. And one of the most common ones are, what are the hot jobs for veterans within your organizations or that you've seen out in the field? Give us some insight. What kind of jobs are out there? Sean?
Yeah, so for us, just some highlights would be, so on kind of 2 sides of our business, on the truck, what we call truck leasing, truck rental side, We have a management trainee program, which is a great starting point for a lot of folks making that transition. It's kind of geared more towards like recent college grads. So if somebody's going, to school first and then into the career field, but it's also a good starting point for, some, I would say junior NCOs, military spouses, to kind of start your career from that point. We also have a lot of diesel technicians is a really key focus for us as well. So anybody with the maintenance background or just kind of mechanically inclined, looking to get into the maintenance space and technician type stuff, a lot of opportunities there. On the logistics side of our business, a lot of just leadership opportunities. So operations leaders, and that really goes from, E5s, E6s, kind of first line supervisors all the way up through. We have a 2-star general. We've brought on 1-star generals, 06s. So senior leaders, we can really cover the gamut. So that's leading operations, logistics operations in a warehouse environment or a transportation environment. So great opportunity for folks to, move from the military, do something a little bit different every day, have some of these challenges, not kind of sitting behind a desk, but really rolling up your sleeves and continuing, to be an active leader. So those are some of our key roles. Certainly a lot more than that. All of our corporate functions, HR, IT, finance, everything that goes to support our business. But those are just a few highlights that we have.
Nice. You guys have a lot of opportunity.
A
Matt?
lot of opportunity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No matter who you are.
I tell you, you might hear a theme from a lot of organizations that, the maintenance and engineering and Sean mentioned like mechanics and things like that. Those are hot jobs these days because there's a serious lack of people that have those skills, right? So they're hot commodities. We're the same way. We manage a lot of what we do is manage buildings for clients. Some of the largest companies, largest business names in the world have their properties managed by Cushman Wakefield. And so these are, organizations that have huge distribution centers to skyscrapers downtown in order to keep the lights on and keep the HVAC system running and all of those different elements moving, conveyor systems, PLCs, things like that. You have to have proper people in there effectively turning the wrenches and overseeing those systems. And a lot of it's very digital and high tech. So we're looking for engineers in data centers. We love to take people out of the Navy, for example, who have experience working on systems on a ship. If you can manage an aircraft carrier or a submarine and the systems within, you can manage a skyscraper or a data center. Leasing agents in our multifamily business. We manage a lot of multifamily properties. So we need people on the ground who manage those properties, but also get families and renters and leasees into those properties, right? So that's another big opportunity. And then property administration and property management. If you look at the skyscraper downtown to the office park around the corner, it has to have a team of people on that property that manage all of the moving parts within that building and operation. And that's where the property administration teams and property management teams come from. As Sean mentioned too, we have the IT and the HR and the recruiters and all the other elemental things that go on in the corporate office. We have one of everything here for the most part. A lot of jobs that match up to what people do in the military as well.
Nice range. So Sultan, do you find that these positions that are hot jobs for veterans are the same for spouses? Can you give us some insight on maybe some hot jobs or industries for spouses?
Gotcha. So for spouses, there are quite a few phenomenal companies here in Hampton Roads that do an amazing job in terms of the work-life opportunities for military spouses. When you look at that military spouse population, they need positions that are typically a lot of times remote, that offers a lot of flexibility. So not your standard shift work, because, I've got to drop the kids off at school. And I also need to be conscious of my military spouses, duty days, deployment, so forth. So there are quite a few companies in Hampton Roads that have those remote work opportunities with those flexible work schedules. But you also have those military spouses that are credentialed and have professional backgrounds. So there are, a lot of folks, when they think maritime industry, they automatically default to shipbuilding and ship repair, and not realize that also includes port operations, offshore wind, alternative energy that support that maritime industry. So within the region, there are a lot of employers that have skin in the game, because that's what we're looking for. We're not just looking for folks that say, hey, we want to hire military. We're looking for those employers that truly have made the military friendly list, and not only just made that list, but are genuinely interested in connecting with our military community.
Awesome advice. So as you're transitioning out, whether you're a spouse or a veteran, the recruiting process may be a little unfamiliar, right? There's lots of different things that, processes, applications, resumes, how do you do that, right? But virtual career fairs for a second, let's take a time out. What's the role of a recruiter who attends a virtual career fair? Can you guys give us some insight on that? Anybody wants to jump in, just go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I think for us, so we have, over 100 recruiters, kind of owning all of our positions, but the folks that man these virtual events are really, trying to kind of play quarterback and talk to as many folks and then get the information to the right folks from there. So generally speaking, the recruiter that's manning, our virtual booth isn't going to necessarily be the owner or the decision maker to be able to move things forward right then and there. But it's really to kind of, triage, essentially like understand who you are, where you are in the country, what you're looking for, type of work. We're always just trying to line up type of work, timing, location, basically, and then making sure that information gets to the right folks from there. So it'll really be for us kind of a, begin the conversation and then let me get you over to the right person to continue our hiring process, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think Sean answered that the same way I would answer that. And I'd add another component to this, and this is more focused on the person who is going to be in a virtual career fair looking for a job. The recruiters, at the companies that we represent, we're big companies. We got a lot of jobs. We've got a lot of different roles open across the country. Recruiters often handle a tiny segment of the whole big picture. One of the pet peeves I've always had, having been a recruiter and still doing this type of work, I used to own 60 requisitions in a company, was when somebody would come in and say, do you have anything in Southern California? I'm like, I have thousands of jobs in Southern California, right? A piece of advice for the candidate looking to go engage that recruiter on a virtual or in-person fair or on LinkedIn or wherever else you're going to reach somebody is to have something in mind already. Maybe go do some research on that company's site, go see what jobs they already have, then approach that recruiter and say, hey, I'm looking for this job in San Diego. I'm in San Diego. I have 6 out of the 8 qualifications. Can you help me get to the next step? I've already applied to it. What do I do from here? And what that recruiter might be able to do in that case is you can use that recruiter effectively now as a piece of the network to get to the next step, right? So it becomes really hard for a recruiter, especially if we've got 50 people in a room talking to us all at once. It becomes really hard for us to go into the system and try to figure out all the nuts and bolts of 50 different jobs, right? So the network is probably going to be the strongest thing that you're trying to utilize here as a candidate. Use that to your advantage. Use the research and the capability of the internet at your fingertips to be prepared to come talk to those people.
Absolutely.
That's
sorry, Sultan, go ahead.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. And what I'd also add on to Matt's assertion in terms of the fit, right? If you could go onto LinkedIn and search that position job title at that company, and then take a look at the types of folks who are actually in that role. They may be commissioned officers, they may be enlisted, they may be senior non-commissioned officers. You want to figure out what type of candidate that company has previously hired somebody into. And if you look like you hit all the check marks on there, that means that they not only have the skill sets, but that company has the appetite for hiring someone like you into that role. That will set you way apart than your competition.
That's great words of advice. And on that note, do you guys have any more insight or advice that you can offer our audience before they attend our virtual career fair in 2 weeks? These are all great things, but anything else?
Yeah, I think it's just, what Matt said, have something in mind, do the prep work, right? I kind of preach to our folks here is like, hey, look, we as an employer need to do our part to meet the candidate in the middle, but the candidate needs to do your part to understand you're coming to the table with an understanding of who we are, generally speaking, the types of roles. I think the other kind of pet peeve that I have is like, hey, I've done a lot in the military. I can do anything for you, right? And that's way too broad. Like, again, I'm trying to find the right people for the right position, all those kind of things. So really going through, okay, ideally, what does my, next job look like? What type of work is that? And really start to hone in on that. And we can give you more information, But again, come with a plan, come with a, here's what I'm looking for, where I'm looking for, when I'm looking for it. If you're going through the transition, if you're immediately available, all those kind of things. Those are the puzzle pieces that we need to kind of figure out immediately. So the more information that we have up front like that, that's going to help that process, smooth.
Something else that I always see a lot of us in the military community, the mistake that we make is we say no to things that we have zero idea what we're saying no to. So for example, I may look at a company just face value, A and B associates. I've never heard of them before. Who are they? And not realize that that company's CEO takes their staff on a paid vacation every single year. So a lot of times we kind of get drawn to the big names that are out there. We overlook the names that we've never heard of, and we pass up opportunities that may be once in a lifetime opportunities. So I always say, when you do your priority list, put the companies that you've never heard of at the top of those lists, because whether it's a virtual or in-person event, those companies are actually dedicating their time and staff to be present there. So there's a real need within that company. And you may never know. If you're waiting to talk to one of the bigger names, you're in a queue of 50 as opposed to having that one-on-one interaction time.
I'd actually add to that, Sultan. I'm an example of those things. Two of my biggest career opportunities have been at companies I didn't know. I used to lead military and veterans programs at the Cintas Corporation, has one of the longest running military and veterans programs in corporate America since like the late 80s. They've been doing this type of work with a dedicated team. They were often ranked as a top military friendly employer as well. And they called me one day and asked if I would be interested in coming to explore an opportunity there. I had no idea what they did. They're a uniform company. They do uniforms, first aid and safety, fire protection. They're one of the biggest companies in America. They're a Fortune 500. Didn't know who they were. They were right up the street from me. Cushman Wakefield is another example of this. We're one of the largest commercial real estate services companies in the world. Also now a top 10 ranked military friendly employer. When they called me, I had to go look and say, well, who the heck's Cushman Wakefield, right? Because these are consumer brands. They're not consumer brands. They're business to business brands. So a lot of organizations out there, you can go to a store and buy something. You can order something from them. In both of these companies I've mentioned, Cintas and Cushman Wakefield, neither of these are something that you as a consumer can go purchase from. You have to be effectively a business owner or a business needing a service from one of these companies. So the average person out there, unless you own a company or are using real estate services, or you need an AED or a first aid and safety kit or a set of uniforms for your employees, you're never going to engage these organizations. But these are massive service organizations out there with just a ton of opportunities. So yes, absolutely. Can't add anything else to what these other guys said. Use the network to your advantage. Go understand what you're looking at. Don't ever walk up and knock on somebody's door and say, hey, what do you have for me? Because they have no idea who you are, what you're looking for. and quite frankly, they're not going to have time to do that. Recruiters are buried. Recruiting is similar to sales. It's a very tough job. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts. And there's unfortunately in the recruiting business, a lot of rejection that goes on. We have to reject people. It's 98% of the candidates that we talk to, and most companies are rejecting the candidates they're talking to. That's why you have to not put all your eggs in one basket and understand who you're talking to and what might get you to that next level.
Great advice. And you bring up a good point, Matt, the dreaded question, where do I fit in within your company, right? How many times have we heard that? And so can you give our audience a little bit of insight how to avoid that question and what they can do to be prepared more? I know we said do our research, but how do you take those skills and, get them to speak the same language that's on the requisition so that you're not asking, where do I fit in within your company?
I'd say it starts here. And these other guys also just tapped into some of this as well, but it is go look for the job that you want. Look at who is occupying that job right now and see if you don't, from a background perspective, look and feel like the people that are already being successful in that job. I tell you, one of the other biggest things that I see that hinders people from getting to the next step is, and I know this sounds painstaking when I say it, and it was painstaking for me when I was coming out of the military as well. Look, I was one of those guys that I can disassemble a 50 caliber machine gun, and I've been to 15 countries, and I've done all these really cool things. It looks good if I'm writing a movie script or a video game, but it didn't look good to an employer where I'm trying to drop my resume off. you have to write your resume to reflect the things that the job description is asking for. So if that job description, I'm going to use some of the common funny little military terms we use, that job description is asking for 5 years of underwater basket weaving and 2 years of unicorn wrangling, and your resume has neither of those on it, the recruiter and or the system, and a lot of the systems don't automatically reject people, but what will happen is they'll grade them based on some of the keywords inside of there. The recruiter at any rate is going to look at that resume and go, this person has nothing that I need. And again, this recruiter might be managing 40 to 60 requisitions with 200-300 applicants in each one. They simply don't have time to get on the phone with every candidate. So what you have to do is, and again, I say it's painstaking, you have to take your resume in the beginning and make it look like what that job description is asking for. Make it look like maybe what the people that are already occupying that job have done previously. That's the first piece. I'd say the second piece is, as we've already mentioned, use LinkedIn, use events like this to your advantage. You want to reach those people. Effectively, what happens in the networking phase of your job search is it becomes who you know, and then during the interviews, it becomes what you know. So rely on that a little bit. Obviously, you're not going to apply to the CEO position if you have no relevant experience, but if you're applying to a middle or junior level position, and it just requires a couple of years of some similar experience, you don't have to have 20 years of experience behind you in that specific role. So what you want to do is get to the person first, maybe ask some questions like, hey, I'm looking at this job. I don't quite have underwater basket weaving experience, but I do have above water basket weaving experience. They might tell you, hey, you know what? That's a good start. Let me move you on to the next person, and then you can talk about how you get those skills on the job.
Great advice. Sultan, what's your opinion on applying for a role prior to a virtual career fair or an in-person career fair?
So that's actually a really good piece of advice. If you are considering a company, so you've got a target list of companies, your research has shown that they've hired somebody similar to you into that role, that it really helps you stand out. When you walk up to an event, you have a conversation with Sean or Matt, you can actually say, hey, listen, Sean, I'm a junior military officer. Looks like you guys have hired someone like me into an account executive role before. I saw that you had an open position. I've applied to that position. Now Sean is really equipped to make that connection, because here's how it works out. If you apply to a position with the best resume on the planet, your odds are 1 in 250 at best. If you actually know a recruiter and that recruiter knows you and you meet all the qualifications for that job, your odds go from 1 in 250 to 1 in 50. Okay. If you know someone that actually works at that company, or somebody in your network can give you a really good referral to someone who works in that company, in that department, your odds leap from 1 in 50 to 1 in 12. And then if you know someone who's actually a hiring decision maker, your odds go from 1 in 12 to about 1 in 5. With sites like LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., there's really no excuse for you to have a target list of companies, a target list of people, especially fellow veterans and military spouses that already work at the organizations that you're trying to join.
Absolutely. That's great advice, Sean. So next question is for you, right? We always encourage our attendees or our registrants who are, looking to join us for the career fair to upload their resume first. Super important, right? So what kind of words of advice can you tell our audience, or insight can you give them on why it's important to upload their resume? What does that do for them?
Yeah, I think it's you can call it whatever you want, necessary evil. It's part of the process, right? Everything doesn't rely on the resume, and certainly as we get in more into talking about the interviews and everything, but that's foundational. That's baseline. That's going to be used in almost every part of this process. Even if you get to a point where somebody that one of the first questions are that's going to be asked is, can I see your resume, right? So it's all about that resume aspect. So certainly for an event like this, but really having a good foundational resume, just a few kind of key points on that piece is, generally speaking, no more than 2 pages, keep it succinct. It was talked about lineup, use the same terminology. If you're going for a specific job, use the same terminology. For an event like this, it's going to be a little bit more broad. But once you start to get to a point where you're starting to apply to different specific companies, you need to really, you almost have to have a specific resume for each application. You need to go through, you need to match it based on the job description that you're using, and really tailor it. And that's going to help with the systems and all that kind of stuff. So I think the final piece would be making sure that you have quantifiable and achievement bullets. I see so often is like, I did this job at, this title, and I'm just going to go through what my job description was. Responsible for XYZ, whatever. It should really, for me, I would recommend one bullet that describes my responsibility, the scope of that position, what I do, who I'm responsible for, and every other bullet underneath that is what did you accomplish? And as much as you can, be something that you can quantify, saved X amount of dollars by doing this project, or whatever it is. So we really need to have the story of what you're able to do. Past performance is the best predictor of future success. All of these kind of ideas, but we need to understand, what did you do in these previous roles, even if it's not apples to apples, right? You're going for a logistics operations leader position here for Penske. You don't have a logistics operations experience previously, but how can you make that connection starting on paper, and then you use that as the foundation in your conversation with the interview to continue to build on that and tell your story and say why you are the best candidate for this position. What do you bring to the table? Why your experience matters? Because everybody here with military experience has a lot going for them. As also mentioned, kind of use the network. Certainly part of the whole deal here is that we have military advocates, whether that's myself or Matt within these companies. Certainly lean on us. It's something that not everybody has, but making sure that you're able to tell that story. And I think it starts with the resume there.
Absolutely. So as far as doing our research, right? So we've encouraged the audience to do their research and go out and find out what kind of roles these companies have, find out, who they're hiring, look on LinkedIn. Are companies doing the same thing on the job seeker side? Are they doing research? And if so, how are they doing that?
To answer your question, the broad question or the broad answer here is to assume that they are. And if we go into the conversation around like social media profiles and things like that, always assume that they are, because they can. There's nothing that restricts them from not doing that. And I say that again broadly as an answer, because if you are on Twitter ranting and raving about sensitive topics and using bad words and stuff like that, you effectively become a representative of that organization if they hire you. So I say broadly, ensure that your public persona is not damaging and will not harm that organization, because they have in other words, your right to free speech is not protected at work necessarily. It protects you from prosecution and persecution, but it doesn't protect you from getting fired. So just broadly as an answer, the other way to answer that is yes. I mean, companies, recruiters, hiring managers are looking at people's LinkedIn profiles. In some cases, they are going to be looking at your social media. They're going to be trying to see who you are and what you do. And it's not for any other reason, at least the way I've seen it employed, not for any other reason other than generally they're looking for your professional qualifications on LinkedIn and trying to see what you're interested in. Do you live and work in that and exist in that community and in that experience? I don't know of, I can't use specific examples of people actually going out and like digging around in Twitter profiles, but I am 100% certain that it happens. I just don't know how often that's happening. So just always be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the roles that I had at my previous position was training our new managers about the HR process. And I would literally ask them, Kayla, you guys are not looking at social media profiles, correct? And they would say, absolutely not, Sultan. We are not looking at any of their profiles. And the reason is during the interview, think of the interview like this. It's that ad that you see for that great product on TV, right? It's going to tell you everything positive, because you're not going to go into an interview and say, hey, you know what, last night I just, put down a kegger or whatnot. You're going to have your best foot forward. And what social media allows that potential hiring manager, because remember, when you're at the interview stage, you're one of potentially 5 candidates, and you're equally potentially qualified for that position. So what the hiring manager has to make the decision on is who is the best fit for their team and minimize the amount of surprises that they're going to get once they bring you on board. So the social media component of that is the research that you're going to do before actually buying that product that you saw that infomercial for. So not to go overly bored on, hey, you know what, obsessing about your social media footprint, but just take a look at it from the viewpoint of a hiring decision maker and say, okay, does this portray either drama, like Matt said, or is there potential legal issues based on what's available online?
Absolutely. And I think a good thing too to keep in mind is the difference between the platforms, right? And what the purpose is. LinkedIn is your professional platform. That's where you want to showcase what you're doing, in the professional world, volunteer experience, work experience, what you're looking for. And then Facebook's more of the personal land, right? Where you can connect with family and friends. And it's important to just keep those things separate. Excuse me. So next question I have, and it kind of ties into one that we have here in the chat from one of our attendees, is on resumes, right? Some companies use resume scrubbers, some use keyword indicators like Matt had said earlier. What kind of advice can you give our audience on, things that they can do to their resume to help? So we've mentioned that we can look at the rec and translate those words from the requisition directly in our resume. But what's your opinion, non-traditional resume format versus traditional? Do we put years on there as far as education, achievement bullets, right? What does that look like? Any words of advice? And I know every company is different and, every opportunity is different, right? But anything that you can, offer to our audience that will help them on their journey?
So I would say find not only a mentor, but find a sponsor. You've got some phenomenal mentorship platforms out there. American Corporate Partners is one, Veterati. Find folks that are working at your target list of companies, because you could actually find them on there and on social media as well. Connect with them, because to your point, Kayla, you asked 1,200 different HR professionals about what they like to see on a resume. You'll get 1,200 different bits of advice. Some folks will tell you, hey, I don't want to see any more than one sheet of paper. Someone else might say, yeah, you know what, put 10 pages on there. Some folks will even tell you, well, use the Georgia font because that was designed to be read on a computer screen. So there's a lot of resume advice out there. I would recommend that connect with talent acquisition professionals that work at your target list of companies and people doing the role that you're interested in. And this is where plagiarism is encouraged. Use the tool that they use. You listen to the folks that are actually looking at your resume on their systems, because they could tell you reverse chronological, what they like seeing, and then do that.
Absolutely. Sean, what about resume gaps?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the importance of, using your network. Things happen, right? Especially with folks in the military and everything. So just being able to explain that and being honest, I think is really key, whether that's about resume gaps or, anything else. But obviously you're trying to sell yourself, but just being able to explain, what was the thought process? If you took some time off, what was that for? All of those kind of things. So I wouldn't necessarily overthink it, but at the same time, I mean, especially at the early stages, if you're just applying and then you're hoping your resume is going to get you through, but you have some kind of vulnerabilities, so to speak, with the resume gap. That's why it's important to follow up with, somebody like myself, a veteran advocate, if you're a veteran, but reaching out to the recruiter, have that conversation, introduce yourself. You're almost in a position where you have to take some of those extra steps, maybe where, you might get screened out because, some companies kind of take that more seriously. So we certainly try to look at everybody, individually. We're not going to, make broad brushstrokes and, hey, if there's a gap, then they're out automatically. But just being prepared to kind of take some of those steps there. The only thing from like a formatting perspective, obviously there's lots of different ways to do it, but I would encourage folks to kind of keep it relatively standard, because what these aggregators will do is suck information. If it can't find dates, if it can't, so, it's pulling all this information. If it can't find dates, it's not sucking the information in there. The recruiter may not even actually be able to see it based on their system sometimes. So, generally speaking, your personal information there, kind of an objective statement, again, tailored to that company and to that role. Usually with some kind of key things that I'm good at, basically, kind of check the mark in 3 columns or whatever. That's where you can really key in on the specific verbiage of what they're looking for. Just go to the, requirements of that job, position, and, not lying or anything, but make sure that you have that information in there. And again, achievement bullets are the best kind of thing that I would encourage, again. So a couple highlights there, but don't worry too much about it. Just be able to explain something like a gap.
Absolutely.
Bill,
That means
I'll put my
Sultan, go ahead.
talent acquisition hat back on for a little bit. So it was amusing that I became the guy I used to make fun of when I had a rec load, right? So sometimes I had maybe about 140, 150 recs, and I got myself down to about 4 to 6 seconds of deciding yes or no whether I was going to move that person forward in the process. And this is what I was looking for in that 4 to 6 second period. Like Sean just said, I was looking at your contact information because I knew whether that position paid relocation. And in Hampton Roads, we've got a bridge tunnel that I know that folks don't want to go over. So because my previous employer, we would have 200 to 300 applicants per position, I would show that a little bit of a bias there, right? So that's my first second and a half of looking at a resume. The very next thing that I was looking at was your level of education and security clearance. Because with that company, there was no wiggle room. If you needed a bachelor's degree or an ABET accredited engineering degree, you needed to have it. So now we're into about seconds 2 to 3. Right after that, I was looking at your years of relevant experience. So if I was looking for a senior procurement analyst, which is a buyer, I was looking for 6 years of specialized buying and experience. And then, so that got me to about seconds 4-ish. And then seconds 4 through about 6 or 7, I'm looking at keywords in your experience that come from the job description. So that was my 4 to 6 second scan on yes, no, and then, hey, I'm only going to forward my top 15 or 20 to the hiring manager, of which, remember, a lot of folks forget that there are internal employees that are also applying for that position as well. So that's a common misconception that we have, is that we're the only applicants.
Absolutely. And so in that lane, like when we're going through that application process, right? And Matt, did you have anything to add before I want to ask another question?
Listen, there's always tons to add, but for the sake of time, and we could have this conversation, the 4 of us could have this conversation for 4 hours. I'm not kidding. There's so much good information we could share, but I have nothing else to add on that topic.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So when we're going through that application process and, we're excited, we're applying for a role and all these questions start to come up, right? Who are you? Where are you from? Self-ID, right? And so what is the purpose of that when an employer asks you, are you a veteran? Are you a military spouse? Is it important to answer that question? What does self-IDing mean to an organization, and how can that help our job seekers in their, journey?
Yeah, I mean, for us, again, most companies these days, I mean, they've invested in somebody like myself, somebody like Matt, Sultan. We have concerted efforts to hire military veterans, military spouses. So I would highly encourage, if you're comfortable, certainly self-IDing. That helps us a lot. That helps me kind of hone in on, I mean, just from a broad perspective, just tracking numbers, right? How many veteran applicants do we have? How many of those turn into hires? Looking at our, recruiting funnel. And then post-hire, how do we make sure that our new veteran hires are getting connected to our business resource group and all the resources that we have? So I would highly encourage folks to self-ID. From my perspective, it does nothing but help, right? I mean, we have these folks that are here to help veterans overcome the challenges that we all are familiar with going through, the transition and everything. So I would encourage it. It's not going to hurt you. Yeah.
I'll second that as well. We spend a lot of time in Treasure. I have an entire team dedicated to this. So we're not only doing the DoD skill bridge programs and things like that, but we are an MSEP, Military Spouse Employment Partnership partner. And a lot of our marketing and media that reaches, because we're not a consumer brand, we're a B2B company, we have to push a little bit harder to get our name in front of the military and veteran population. That means I can spend money on general advertising. I can go to social media. Facebook, for example, doesn't necessarily allow me to target specific demographics. like veterans for jobs. It's one of their rules. I can just wrap digital fences around locations and then feed ads in there. And what I'm betting on is when I turn on a campaign, on the back end, the reporting will review or recommend that, hey, look, you reached your target demographics, like your veterans and your military population are applying to your jobs. LinkedIn is a little bit better. I'm allowed to target people with previous employers like U.S. Army, U.S. Navy, et cetera, et cetera. So we like to have those stats, as Sean mentioned. I like to be able to show veteran applicants to hires, my hire ratios, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll take it one step further. We're a government contractor. We have federal contracts. The government requires us to have what are called good faith efforts, which really means that we're out there doing the work to attract a diverse population, one of which is the veteran population. We don't have these programs to meet that checkbox. We have these programs because we get the best talent in the world from the military and veteran population. If we wanted to just check a box, we'd just kind of sort of slime into a program and pretend like we're doing it, but we actually have a lot of resources dedicated to it. But as such, we have to have those numbers on hand. We have to report those numbers. If the Department of Labor comes and knocks, we have to be able to say, yes, this is our percentage. These are our numbers, et cetera. This is an example of the last question you asked about resumes and percentages and numbers and dollars and things like that. That's something that I put on my own resume. If I'm looking for a job, it is here are my percentages. Here's what I performed inside of an organization, what I led the organization to do from a numbers perspective. We like to be able to say that at the end of the year, not only are we compliant to those things that the government's asking of us, but we've gone well above those things. We've done so much more than that, and now we're engaging so many other people. MSEP program also, the DoD MSEP program also asks us to track those numbers on military spouses. So it's a partnership. Part of that partnership was, will you do your best and have a good effort to track the military spouses that are applying and getting hired inside of your job? And of course, the answer is yes. So I'll add a final note on that. When you go into that system, unless it's otherwise stated, if you're just putting down your protected or non-protected veteran status, your recruiter and hiring manager shouldn't be able to see that unless they have some kind of strange access. It's a compliance thing. They don't have access to see that, just like they don't have access to see your race and gender information, your other EEO information. It's typically asked so that we can pull it in aggregate reporting on the back end, so we can look at aggregate numbers, but not as individuals. So it's not like, hey, is Sean a veteran, and which one of the classification could he be a disabled veteran, in which case we want to discriminate against. It's not used like that. So I think that's an item that a lot of people need to understand, is that it's aggregate numbers we're counting on the back end to make sure that we're doing the right thing, but also that our programs are working the way that we want them to work.
Great insight. And some companies too will send out, information, or will use that self-ID trigger to alert candidates of different benefits that they may have, or trainings, or certification programs, tuition reimbursement, right? All kinds of really cool things. So we have a great question that came up in the chat, and someone, wanted to know, what do you do if you're kind of in the military, you've got a ton of experience in a certain field, or you've been out and you've worked in a certain field for a while, re-educated yourself, went back to school, and now you want to do a completely different thing, right? You want to change careers, start something new, start something fresh. Where do you start? How do you go about doing that?
Go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, yeah, we keep going back to it, but that's the importance of a network. And even if you don't have somebody currently in your network, you got to be proactive. I mean, I think first, having realistic expectations. You've done a lot over here, that's great, but understand that if you're going to switch like that and do something completely new, you might not be able to do a direct lateral transfer, and just understand what that means. You might have to take a step or two back as part of that process, which can be frustrating, but if you look at it positively, everybody involved wants to make sure that if you move into that you're successful in doing that. It does us no good as an employer to put you in a position where you're out over your skis, in over your head, and you fail within 6 months and then you're out the back door. right? So everybody involved wants to make sure that you're set up for, long-term success. Everybody's kind of, vested in that. But back to the network piece, being proactive, find somebody who's doing something like that. Try to find a mentor. But, just reaching out and asking for something called like an informational conversation. Find another veteran, on LinkedIn or whatever that's doing that job that you want to, move into. Ask them to have a quick conversation. Sometimes, what many folks going through the transition are, kind of facing is you don't know what you don't know. You've done X here. You're trying to do Y over here. You have an idea of that in your head. But until you talk to somebody who's doing that day in and day out, you may not have the full picture. You may kind of romanticize, hey, I want to be a logistics operations leader, but you talk to somebody doing that job every day is like, oh, wait a second, that's maybe not what I want to be doing every single day. So starting there, ask for, can I just have a quick conversation? Hey, look, this is my background. I'm trying to get into this. I did this for taking this job here. I've had previous talent acquisition leadership experience, but I've never led a military program. So I reached out to leaders of military programs, as I started going through this process to pick their brain. Hey, what has made you successful? Things that, that I can kind of take into consideration. What matters? Because that helps me then hone in on how do I sell myself as the next military, recruiting leader here at, Penske, a large company. So network, be proactive, have good realistic expectations. Make sure that, what you're trying to pursue, that you're doing what you need to do, whether that's certifications and, making sure that you're competitive and everything. But that's really where I think that's a situation you have to rely on building that network. Otherwise, it's going to be challenging. It's just going to be challenging to be able to make that switch there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everything that Sean said. So every single Tuesday at both of our centers, we have guaranteed either informational or job interviews. So we have select employers that are pre-screened, and they come in to spend a day with us, Kayla. Now, when you have someone that is looking to make that career switch, you also have to factor into three things, right? Money, location, and job type. And a lot of us may have an extremely valuable existing skill set, but we've done it in the military and we don't have any idea how we can use that skill set on the other side of the uniform. And to Sean's point, I may think, hey, I want to get out of contract management, and then I want to get into something else, but not realize that that existing skill set that you have actually pays more than the one that you want to get into. So it's crucial to have those conversations.
Look, both of these guys answered the question the same way I would have answered it. I started thinking about this, like examples of when I've had to interview candidates like this, somebody maybe was switching careers ultimately, or in some cases, I saw another question in the chat about maybe somebody who was older or more seasoned. I've had the conversation with the colonel leaving the Pentagon, and they're like, hey, I want to come into this, junior level job at your company. And I have to kind of talk them out of that because, frankly, what I would say is, frankly, sir, you've been leading 50,000 troops in, these large scale global operations. You're not going to come get coffee in a meeting for a couple of guys in Washington, D.C. It's simply not going to last long. What I would say, that the more anecdotal answer to that, and again, I have nothing further to add on to anything that these other guys already said because their answers were perfect. But if you are going to be doing that, what works best if you get to the interview phase is to ask the questions and make your attitude one that is humbled and hungry. Don't ever go into the interview like, look, man, I've been doing this for 30 years, but I'm switching jobs and I know everything there is to know, and I can come in here and teach you. That's the wrong way to approach that. Because as Sean mentioned, you might have to take a couple of steps backwards. Think about a company. If any of us owned a business, right, and I had $100,000 set aside to hire another person to triple the size of my company, I have to spend that $100,000 on the exact right person. I don't have time to waste. I can't go hire a person and they may or may not work out. I can't waste $50,000 of that for 6 months on a person who's just going to spend it and not do anything with it. So I have to make the right decision. And I tell you, as a person who's been interviewing people for 20 years of my career, I'd rather have the person who's going to knock on my door and ask all the tough questions and come in and learn just and absorb everything they possibly can, despite the fact they might have more experience than me. The colonel at the Pentagon obviously has more experience than I ever will, leading people in large organizations and budgets and multinational and global organizations and operations. But that person knows nothing about my job. And so if he wants to come in and learn, he's going to have to learn from me, right? So I think that the summary here is humble yourself, look for the network, absolutely. Understand you got to take a step backwards or steps backwards in some cases, but don't ever come in assuming that anything that you've already done is going to be relevant to what you're trying to do from this point forward. And let the interviewer, let the manager uncover that. They might be like, well, man, you do have tons of leadership experience. Well, that's great. We can use that here, but you got to learn how to do our job first. You got to learn how our company operates first. And then what I've seen a lot of is the person who's like, fine, take me a couple steps back. 2 years, 3 years later, they're like rocketing to the top because they already have all the hard level leadership and planning and budgeting and all the stuff. They've already done all that. Now they've taken a couple of years to learn your industry and your company and learn who's in it. And they shot up, but they never got there by being a know-it-all. So humble yourself, have a good attitude, have a learning attitude, ask the silly questions if you have to.
Absolutely. Asking questions is super important, right? That's what I'm doing to you guys. So we've got another question from our audience. And if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat, right? If there's something you want to know, we want to ask it. So someone is curious what to do if they have certifications or licensing or, any state board type stuff that may be relevant to a position, but is currently expired or maybe needs renewed. What's your words of advice?
I think the short answer for that is if the job does not require that certification, then the experience is better than the certification anyway. So I get this question a lot of times for PMPs. Do I need to have a PMP to be a project manager in commercial real estate? No. You can be a project manager in commercial real estate by having project management experience in construction, for example. So yeah, the certifications are irrelevant to the job. Don't go renew them if you don't need them, right? Or get the job and then let the company renew them for you in some cases. But obviously, if you're going to go be a brain surgeon, you're going to have the appropriate documentation saying that you're a brain surgeon. But for a lot of jobs, certifications are just add-ons. The experience is really what they're after.
Yeah, that's spot on. Folks would ask me, I'm thinking about getting my Lean Six Sigma, my PMP, whatever that cert is. And my short answer to Matt's point is, yeah, sure, if you see it in the job description, that's awesome. But you want to take a look at the corporate culture within that company and see if those employees at that company value that cert. You've got some project managers that are quite frankly anti-PMP, right? But you do have those hiring managers that will say, hey, Sean, Kayla, tell me how you would plan a birthday party. And they're looking for that PMP type language in your answer. So short answer, goes back, and I know that you probably heard it until you become nauseous, but network, have those informational interviews with the folks that are doing the job, or more importantly, have moved on from the job you're trying to get into, and they will give you that insight.
Great advice, guys. All right, so we've got another one. So COVID really changed the environment, right, that we live in, right? There's work from home is more common now. It's really just changed things. So for someone who may have been an entrepreneur or own their own business at the time, and then now is currently, looking to enter the workforce due to lifestyle changes, right? What kind of words of advice do you have for an individual like that? Would it be similar to somebody who's looking to change careers in general, kind of like what we talked about earlier? Or is there anything specific that you can offer someone who's coming from entrepreneurship into the workforce?
That's a hard case-by-case question to answer, I think. I've interviewed and talked to a lot of people who are completely switching, or I see this question in the comments here, running a business and then COVID took that all away. I would say, if you're a business owner and you were running a successful business, you can probably lead operations, and depending on the size of organization you're used to leading, you can probably lead operations in almost any type of company or management in any type of company. I I say that again on a case-by-case basis. Plenty of business owners are terrible leaders, and they are terrible financial people, and they're terrible everything. Plenty of people that aren't leading businesses should be leading businesses, right? So all case by case. I think my best piece of advice would be find a job that matches best, or find an industry or a job inside of an industry that matches best what you were doing before. I think the other thing, and I say this to a lot of people leaving the military, because I'll get the E8 coming out of the military or the 05 coming out of the military, and they're like, I have to plug into this type of role right now. You're not married to whatever you're doing next. Your career should look like a lattice, not a ladder necessarily. You're going to move sideways and up and down, and sometimes like that. Whatever you pick for your next job doesn't have to be what you're stuck with for the next 50 years. I think the average person is switching jobs like every 3 years or something like that. I forget what the stats say about, my generation of people. You're funding your own retirement. Your company is not, in most cases, your companies aren't giving pensions for sticking around for 40 years anymore. You're funding your own retirement. You're taking your 401ks with you. You can invest privately without a company too. Wherever you end up from this point forward, it doesn't necessarily matter if you stay there for 30 years or 2 years or 6 months or what have you. So kind of a longer answer to that question, but I would suggest finding a role inside of an industry that would complement what you were already doing previously.
Absolutely. And, to add to that, I think expand your options, right? I mean, there's franchising out there too, which is also an opportunity. So if you love business ownership and you're really good at it, you want to stay in it, look at franchising. They've already got a roadmap laid out for you, and some are even, owner operator models. Sorry that we didn't have, more, but that's just such a tough question. It's really just going to depend on who you are and what you want. And, there's lots of varying factors, but reach out, network, and ask questions. And build upon the people or industry experts that you have within your network. Another question here is, what is considered an entry-level position when transitioning? I mean, you're already coming out, you have experience, you may have done a job for so many years while you were in the military, but when you're coming out now, you're looking at entry level. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit different, kind of case by case. Entry level for an officer is going to be different than an entry level for, junior NCO. So, I mean, we've identified kind of our typical starting point, so to speak, for folks making the transition based on your military experience. So I wouldn't focus on entry level as far as like bottom rung, but like entry points into the organization, depending on your experience, your grade, and where you're coming from the military. So I would not look at it necessarily as like I got to start at the bottom. I need to find the best match, if that again kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd say entry level, in my experience, like the general range of definitions of entry level mean that the job does not require you to have any previous experience. The company's going to teach you that job from this point forward. And as such, it will pay that type of range, right? You're not being paid based on your potential. You're being paid based on what you're producing, or based on what the market value of that job is. And so just understand that if you are willing to, again, as Sean mentioned before, take a step backwards or take a step sideways or what have you, you might have to take an entry level or a junior level position. Junior level being defined as, hey, you have some of the qualifications, maybe it's a year or two in the job or the industry, but you might have to step into an entry or junior level position to move forward. But probably different ways to define that. To Sean's point, if you're an 03 coming out of the military, going into an entry level role at that level might be entry not based on your experience, but based on the level of knowledge you have inside of the organization, inside of that company or that job. I'd say this, that most companies, unless you're doing something very specialized, in most companies, you're going to come in and have to learn anyway. Most of us did not go to college for the job we're doing right now.
Absolutely. You guys have given us so much advice and so much insight and answered a ton of our questions. We really appreciate it. We've got like 1 minute left. So I just want to round robin 3 words of advice to those who are attending today. If you could sum everything up 3 words, what would it be to encourage, our audience to go out and find their next career path? Sean, Sultan?
Let's see. So I think attitude, positive attitude, you understand how to tell your story, but the attitude and how you approach this. This is a challenge. This is a challenging process. Network. I mean, that could be all 3 words right there, but really build a network. And then I don't know, maybe just expectations. Manage your expectations, help put your best foot forward, but managing those expectations through this process.
Yeah, networking is a big one. I usually use the same 3 words: network. I'd also say ownership. Your transition and your success and anything you do in your career is not somebody else's responsibility. That's just tough love. It is 100% your responsibility, but you might have to add in the responsibility of others to help you get there. And work ethic. Nothing will get you to where you want to be other than, not even knocking on the right doors, but kicking the right doors down and going and intently going after what you're after.
And last but not least, I would say that you definitely want to go ahead and do an audit of your network, do an audit of your calendar, and most importantly, follow up. 90% of your transition success is going to be determined by who you know, and the other 10% is going to be your ability to follow up.
Great insight, guys. So thank you again so much. You guys have been amazing. Thank you for our attendees for joining us today. Wish we could get to more questions. We could be all day, right? Talking and asking a million things, but make sure you join us for the next one, and make sure that you get registered for our upcoming career fair, which is in 14 days. It'll be 12 to 4. So if you haven't gotten registered yet, gijobs.com/fair. We'll put the link in the chat again. And thank you so much, everybody, from both our attendees and our panelists. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today.